Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Bruce, it looks like we're wearing matching shirts today.
Mine says the Beatles on it. What does yours
Mine
say?
says nothing.
Oh, okay.
Nike shirt, so might have a Nike logo somewhere. The Beatles, cool, very cool. How many Beatles are still alive, eh? Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, yeah. What about that other, the fifth Beatle? Is he's Pete Best? Is he still alive?
Billy Preston?
No, Pete Best.
Oh.
Wasn't he the drummer?
Oh, there's been three different fifth Beatles.
Fifth Beatles. I don't think Billy Preston's alive either, though.
George Martin.
He was big. He was huge.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Bruce. It's summertime, but the news is cooking along, including a big interview between Darnell Nurse and Luke Gazdic, which we will talk about. There's been a viral video from Evander Kane that we will discuss. We will discuss a couple posts that we've written and are going to write. One about the worst first overall draft picks in NHL history, where Nail Yakupov's now in the running. We'll discuss your post on whatever became of all the some of the much loved Oilers defensemen, bottom pairing defensemen who were traded away, and what's become of their careers. Not all bottom pairing defensemen; some of them are actually top pairing. We'll talk a little bit about a comment Terry Jones made about the Oilers. And was there anything else on our list? I think that's it, right? The big five things.
Mandatory mention of how no news is not necessarily good news with the inaction in the Bouchard and McLeod camps, but I think we've almost talked that to death, David, and I'm pretty sure we'll have our next podcast will be discussing Ryan McLeod signing.
Yeah, and then probably quickly after that, a Bouchard. Yeah, so we'll get it. We'll talk about that next week when they sign contracts, which is going to happen probably next week for both of them. I'm going to guess. All right, Bruce. Let's start with the Evander Kane video. You know, it's interesting. When he signed, of course, there was lots of controversy, and a lot of it merited, right? He had, there's just endless list of conflicts that he was involved with, from teammates, creditors, acquaintances, girlfriends, and an ex-wife, and lots of controversy around the player. Lots of people bitterly disappointed the Oilers signed him. I think, though, whatever people thought of him rightly or wrongly at that time, and that since he's come to Edmonton, he's become something of a local legend, fan favorite kind of player. He has made, and I think it is fair to say he's made pretty much all the right moves since coming to Edmonton, at least. Whatever happened before, he seems to have figured out public life. And he certainly he got off to an exceptionally strong start with the team, both in terms of scoring goals and also just bringing swagger to the team, standing up for his teammates, which everyone really appreciated. I think this was the thing that I didn't grasp with Evander Kane, is what a physical force, what an intimidating force he was on the ice in terms of intimidating other players on other teams. And we saw it last year, not last year in the playoffs, but the year before in the playoffs with Matthew Tkachuk of the Calgary Flames, was seemingly taken right out of the series in terms of being a pest by Kane's intimidation. So
seemed that way, didn't it?
It did seem that way. Now, I've heard since then he might have been injured. Tkachuk might have been injured in that series, and it's a good excuse. Anyway, there's the more recent stories. First of all, what do you think of that assessment? Do you think that's fair? Do you take exception with any of that, or what would you add to it?
Since he got here, he's been good. I understand. I wrote about Red at the time when he got here, some of the issues that were outstanding, and how some segments of the fan base were not going to be impressed, specifically the women in the fan base, that and many of them that I know expressed unhappiness with that move. And I wrote that, and then I said, I'm just going to judge this guy by what I see on the ice. And all that said, which is some good, some bad, but all that said, what I have seen off the ice, I've actually been pretty impressed. I he seems to just get along famously with kids, and I got all day for that.
Yeah, and there's a famous incident, of course, this year when he's befriended and he's mentoring kind of this young girl who got cancer a few years ago, and he invited her. She went to an LA Kings playoff game, and she was harassed, accosted because she was wearing an Oilers sweater. Someone apparently spit on her.
She was wearing an Evander Kane Oilers sweater.
Oh, is that okay?
This is Evander Kane who did this to Kings fans in the playoffs last year. I'm holding 7 fingers up for those listening to the podcast. So, some of this was, if you will.
What was the 7 about? Why 7 fingers?
We're going back to Edmonton for Game 7 after he scored the empty netter that clinched Game 6, and he went over and he showed the 7 fingers. And some fans thought he was signaling that it was his 7th goal of the series, which it was in the 6th game. But he said, no, not about that at all. It's all about Game 7. Read my lips. And of course, if you read your lips, what he says, we're going the same Game 7, baby. And he does have swagger, and sometimes it gets him into trouble. And I don't want to jump to the conclusion that it got this little girl into trouble, but the fact is Kane wasn't popular there, and she bore the brunt of it. But he famously went to bat for her afterwards.
Yeah, on Instagram. And
then in the 2000s, can't put that on him. I mean, come on. Yeah, but it is the sequence of events.
Against Vegas, then he got in a fight with Keegan Colasar, who was a pretty rough customer, and they were down on the ice together, and Kane just was giving him body shots. And in the post-game interview, Ryan Rashog of TSN asked him about the body shots, and said that's not very common. And Kane's now famous answer is when you, and I'll use the Battlestar Galactica word, when you frack around, sometimes you got to find out. And that's what happened. And
then he went on, yeah. And then just a matter of fact, and that's what happened. As if there was no question that if he decided to settle the score, that score was going to get settled. And he did get some extra shots in Colasar, and many Oilers fans didn't mind those extra shots, I don't think.
So then he plays beer league hockey in Edmonton this summer, and he goes by the official score sheet name of FAFO. F-A, and then his last name is F-O-F-A-O, which stands for frack around and find out. So finally, then this week, which I thought was the best. That was the best Evander Kane moment that we've had, other than scoring all those goals and like anything, the off-ice stuff, like that was so fun. Like that's really funny. Could you imagine lining up
his brother Fa?
Could you believe if you're lining up in there across from you on a beer league hockey is Evander Kane again? It's just like
holy crap!
Just can we not play this game? Yeah, it would be like I don't want to play. All right.
Well, I'd want to play, but I'd want to make sure I was smiling at him and that he was smiling back.
I wouldn't even want to play. All right. So then the latest thing is he's now playing beer league, I guess, in LA. And there's a video of him going down the ice with it's a 2-on-0 essentially, and he's got the puck and he puts the puck over to a guy, and the other guy's wide open for a shot and he misses the net. So Spittin' Chicklets, the podcast, which stars former Oiler Ryan Whitney and former NHL fourth liner Paul Bissonnette, puts out a kind of a funny little tagline under the video that says, tag a buddy who's missing this open net feed from Evander Kane. So you're supposed to identify one of your buddies who can never score a goal. So what Kane does is he does just that. And the name that he tags is Paul Bissonnette, which is kind of funny because Paul Bissonnette
would have missed from there.
He would have missed. A lot of unkind Oilers fans put the name down Jesse Puljujärvi, I noticed, because anyway. But
this year?
This year.
Him and Yamamoto
both. Bissonnette was a 7% scorer, shooting percentage in the NHL. For 6 seasons, he scored 7 goals in 202 NHL games. So I thought the Bissonnette reference was, like, that was brilliant. Evander Kane strikes me, like,
He got 7 goals in one series, Evander
Yeah,
Kane.
Evander Kane strikes is very bright.
Mm-hmm.
He is a smart guy. He's very well spoken, and and it looks like, I mean, he just had another child with his new wife. It looks like things are going well for him. He's got this new contract with the Oilers. He got a contract settlement in San Jose where they're topping up his salary, I think, in Edmonton. So he had some rough times, and probably was the author of some of those rough times himself. But it looks like he's doing well here in Edmonton. So
He's extremely charismatic,
yeah,
and he really has like a big presence, and even on a screen, but in a room apparently even more so. And that doesn't necessarily always work to his advantage. Let's put it that way. But he's the Vladdy Guerrero of the Oilers, kind of, in terms of his presence. And
I don't I don't like, that's lost on me because I'm not a baseball fan.
Okay.
I know who he is, Vladimir Guerrero, but I don't know.
He's kind of
was he the Reggie Jackson? Like, I know,
yeah,
1970s.
Yeah. He's the straw that stirs the drink, and I'm not saying Kane. I'm just saying Kane's just naturally like that, and I've always seen him that way, whether he's with Atlanta or Winnipeg or all the points in between.
He is a self-confident individual, Bruce, and he's come into his own perhaps as a man in Edmonton. So that's what I see with him. All right. Hope it continues.
Darnell, eye clean break there.
Darnell Nurse is up next. Now, he gave an interview to Luke Gazdic, who's got his own podcast now. And the interviews have been pretty good, I've noticed, which is, I find a lot of podcasters, if they're not journalists, and I know it's popular to shit all over journalists now and blah, 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 but a lot of podcasters that I listen to who are authors aren't very good interviewers because they like to talk too much. They don't interview people. They're always giving their opinion and debating and discussing. And really what I want to hear from an interview is an interview. I want to hear them ask direct questions and get the time to have them answered and then get follow-ups. And Luke Gazdic does a good job of that.
I was very impressed with Gazdic.
Yeah, I thought he if I was a little bit critical, he interrupts a little bit as they're answering the question. He interjects quite a bit. He might want to just pull back a bit from that. But what he's really good at, and this was a really good interview, was just asking the question, getting the answer, asking the question, getting the answer, and that's a real skill that the best interviewers have.
That's some good questions. Anyway, he also he interjected a little bit with some of his own experience being an ex-NHL player himself. That they played on the same team for a time there at the end of Gazdic's time here in Edmonton when Nurse was a rookie. But I would say out of the 42 minutes, it was probably 10 minutes for Gazdic and 30 for Nurse. Like, he really gave him room to tell a story, and quite a story it is.
Indeed. And Nurse comes across as a very driven individual, very responsible individual, and focused. And he talked about, all the courses that he's taking. He's taking some university level courses, including one in foundational math. And he spoke, you got a real sense of the strong family that he comes from.
Oh, so a strong athletic family. I mean, that part was amazing. He talked about all the basketball players, especially on the women's side of his family, including one. He said his aunt Gracie, was it something? I think she had a name like that. He said she still has all the records in Syracuse University. Nobody ever talks about her. And I'm going, geez, I don't remember hearing about Aunt Gracie. I'm too busy hearing about the sister, the cousin.
Mika, I was looking up his sister Kia,
Sarah,
who played
Sarah Kia.
Kia. Now her career's taken a little, like, she was such a great player, but her career, I noticed, has taken, I don't know if it was an injury, but it's in the last couple of years, it's kind of taken she's only 26, but it's taken, she's gone downhill a bit. So I wonder what's happened there. She's not putting up the points like she used to earlier in her career in the WNBA. I mean, for the Canadian national team, she was the best player for a few years, and I'm not sure if that's still the case. Anyway, there was one quote, though, that got everybody's attention, And so I'll try to give the full quote in context here. So Gazdic, so as we all know, Nurse signed a contract which pays him 9.125 million for this last year for the next 7. So he was Gazdic asked him about the pressure he felt from within and from without due to that new contract. Here's what Nurse said, quote, I mean, there's an expectation before I sign the contract of what I think I'm capable of performing and of being at each and every night. I've played in a high pressure market since I first came to the league. It's great. Me personally, I love it because there's that juice, that fire in the summer. But I mean, you also have to take a lot of stuff with a grain of salt. Sometimes I feel like I've been blamed from everything from a goal against to the traffic on Stony Plain Road. You have to be really cognizant of the pressure upon yourself. But I mean, look, there's no one that's going to expect more out of me than me. That's been something that's been instilled in me since I've been very young. So yeah, there's pressure that comes along with that contract. End of quote. So the part that got everyone's attention was, I think, completely honest, not just honest, but fair and accurate comment from Darnell Nurse, that he gets blamed for a whole heck of a lot. And this idea that he's blamed for everything from a goal against to the traffic on Stony Plain Road. Now, I think he nailed it. That's how it is in Edmonton with this player right now. And especially since he signed the contract, but not just due to that contract. There's been a faction of Oilers fans who have been on Nurse's case almost from the start and have not let up, and they just see him as a mediocre hockey player in terms of reading the game and his decision making on the ice. They see him as exceptionally mistake prone and not up to much as an NHL hockey player. I think that's. Have I said too much? Have I overstated the criticism, Bruce? How would you phrase it?
Not that he's not an NHL player. I mean, most people would put him in the top 4 of the, even that, like its critics would say, second pairing defenseman paid way too much, which is leading or second in just about every conversation is the contract. And there's no avoiding it in that cap space in NHL. The contract is, it's capital for building your team. And so they invest an awful lot of it in this player. The thing that struck me as funny was it seemed like the reaction to that comment, which was in a few headlines as being sort of a takeaway, obvious sort of flashpoint out of a 42-minute interview, of which this happened in the 40th minute, right?
Sometimes the best quotes come at the end of an interview.
The best goal comes late in the third period. Anyway, this was the obvious sort of, he said that'll get a reaction. Of course it did. And it's funny to me because some of the reaction I'm hearing are coming from the people who, dare I say, blame Nurse for everything from a goal against to the traffic on Stony Plain Road, because there are folks out there. I mean, obviously not literally, but he sure does get blamed for a lot, and he doesn't get credit for a lot of what he does. This is what pisses me off. As an Oiler fan, I like my Oilers, and I don't like it when some of my favorites get criticized, and he's on the long list of Oilers favorites. So you're going to argue your case. Let me argue his. He's he's at very much at the center of that room. He's part of the group. He's part of the core that you could see him coming on together at the 2015 training camp with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nurse. And you could see it was the 3 of them. They were friends. You could see it out there on the ice from the stands. And they've been the core around this, which this team has been built. And to this point, they're obviously, until they win something, it's a lot of drama, and it's a lot of anticipation and a lot of disappointment each year when the end comes. But to me, they so much remind me of the core three from 1979 of Gretzky, Messier, and Lowe, with Nurse playing the part of Kevin Lowe. And if you didn't like Kevin Lowe as a hockey player, well, probably you're not going to like Darnell Nurse either. And I'm not saying they're the same, but I'm saying many of their qualities are the same. And I view them both as players of high character, and they're the guys that their team wants to go to battle with.
That is an excellent comparison, Bruce. That really is apt. I think that's really apt because Lowe was always in the top four, but was he the best defenseman? And you know the issue with these Oilers
matchups.
Yeah, he got the toughest matchups. The issue with these Oilers is there hasn't been a Paul Coffey. Now Evan Bouchard may slip into that role. Evan Bouchard may get a point a game next year, so we might have a defenseman with that kind of offensive power on the Oilers. He's not. I mean, Evan Bouchard stylistically isn't close to Paul Coffey. He's an Al McInnes style. He's Larry Murphy. That's always been a much more apt comparison. So anyway, I thought that so you're saying some people who are his biggest critics were offended that Nurse pointed out the criticism.
Maybe I read it more into it than was there, but there seemed to be some butthurt people out there that he said that. I mean, anybody who's got a pulse surely knows that the guy's getting ripped, whether they're doing the ripping or agreeing with the ripping or agreeing with some of the ripping or disagreeing with all of it. You got to be knowing that there's a lot of, this guy gets ripped a lot. And he really took it in the middle of the season when he made he did go into a defensive slump, and he made a couple of bad mistakes that cost games. And you were 9.25, not 9.5, $9.25 million defenseman shouldn't be making that mistake. And it just sort of got out of control there for a little while. And then he got his game back, and
I'd say he got more criticism this year. I'd say he got more fair criticism this year than he's ever had before. And I think you and I criticized him more this year than we have ever criticized him in the past. And I think and it's interesting because I think what we may have been somewhat incorrect in our criticism. What we saw and what we were raising constantly was a player that we thought was trying to do too much. And maybe this was more me than you. Like I'll wear this because I know I made it, but I think you might have as well. I'll say.
But I rip him from time to time for his play, right? It's a play.
Yeah.
So
we were doing that, and I was doing that, and I was saying he's trying to do too much. He's got to keep it simple. He's all over the ice. He's here, he's there, he's every effing where, and he's not where he should be in front of his own net, protecting his goalie. And this criticism came to a head in the playoffs, especially on one play where Zach Whitecloud of the Vegas Golden Knights got a pass at the blue line, and Nurse was out there covering another player. And as Zach Whitecloud's steaming in on the Oilers' net, he's actually crossed the blue line
getting picked by Warren Fogle
into the neutral zone. When it seems to every Oiler fan that he should be covering the slot. And this happened to a lot. So this was the criticism, and we were hot at the time. Now, what I've since come to theorize, I don't have proof of this, is this was the Oilers' system to follow your man wherever he went. And that's what Nurse was doing. And he followed his man out over the blue line on that play. I think it was Riley Smith, if I'm not mistaken. And Smith dumped the puck off to Whitecloud, who was Fogel's man, and Fogel wasn't Johnny on the spot covering him. Now, maybe they should have switched, and maybe Nurse could have handled different.
They picked each other off. They just got in the wrong lane.
Essentially, it was a comedy of errors, and it was an ugly play. And what I've come to think is that the Oilers' defensive system was exploited aggressively by Vegas, and it was a huge tactical advantage for the Vegas Golden Knights. And it's the main reason I believe that they were able to get past what I think was a superior Oilers team. And what I've been calling for on this podcast repeatedly, ad nauseum, probably boringly by now, no doubt, is that the Oilers need to change to more of a zone system and just keep those defensemen in front of the net more often. Simplify it. That'll help players like CC Nurse, Ekholm, every one of them. So I think I was over the top and criticizing Nurse because I might not have understood this, that he was actually playing the system. He was doing his job. It was just that his job was really not the best tactical idea.
Well, that's the toughest part of our scoring system is when we're trying to score defensive assignments.
Yeah.
Because we don't know for sure what we are. We can have a pretty fair guess after watching over time who's supposed to take what man and so on. But if, and sometimes it's somebody else that blows the assignment that creates the chaos that happens. And sometimes it's, several men at once that break down. In this case, I think I agreed with giving Nurse a mistake because he got picked. With they took the wrong lane. He and Fogel messed up, and Zach Whitecloud got a free lane down the right side. And that said, if your goaltender comes out and takes away the short side on a shot from the right face-off dot that he sees coming from sort of 2 seconds before, all that goes away, and that save never happened either. So it was one of those things. A little glove, little leather can make a lot of those defensive mistakes disappear, and that was one that didn't disappear.
Bruce, there was way too many moments where Oilers defensemen looked really bad on the ice this playoff series. So I think between the players and the coaches, they got to, and the centers as well, they just looked bad. Everyone, like there was too many wide open looks in front of the Oilers net these playoffs. And the Oilers, whatever else comes this coming season, they've got to figure this out. They've got to figure out their slot defense. I think personally simplify it, go with the same kind of zone that Vegas did. But whatever they do, they got to figure this out because the criticism of Nurse and CC and other defensemen, Desharnais, really often comes from these moments on the ice. And same with Bukestad, Draisaitl, McLeod, where the players are just left wide open in the slot, and you can't have it. And the criticism won't stop until those plays stop. And if those plays don't stop, the Oilers don't win the Stanley Cup. So this is job one to me, in my mind, for the Edmonton Oilers this year, is figuring this out. Either like, what if this is the system you're going to stick with? We'll get the players to perfect it, or do well enough where those mistakes don't happen, or change your system and get the players to master that one, because it's why I believe it's why they lost to Vegas. It's the main reason why they lost to Vegas. And you're right. Stu Skinner had two seconds to size up Zach Whitecloud, but Zach Whitecloud also had 2 seconds of open, just
oh sure, he went from the blue line to the dot,
wide open, and even NHL
he
players
really stepped into it. And he picked the corner.
Yeah. So there we go. All right, moving on.
What Darnell Nurse, one last thing about the Vegas series. He said the following: the better team won. They won the cup. Congrats to them.
He did.
And so that was just one of quite a few things that I heard in that interview that impressed me. And I implore people, especially those who want to draw an opinion on those 10 seconds, listen to the whole interview. It's well worth it. This guy has got a lot going on. He's doing lots of good charitable work in the community, right? He's been named the finalist 2 times in a row for, what is it, Pearson, for community involvement. And lots of reasons to like the guy, but people see that one big reason not to, that big old contract, but I mean.
I don't think the better team won. That's why I'm still ticked. I think the Oilers were the better team. But they obviously they weren't. They lost. Anyway. Okay. Bruce, Terry Jones, longtime Edmonton Journal and Sun columnist, member of the writers wing of the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Elmer Ferguson.
One of the great sports writers in Canadian history. And he was on Twitter, and he said the following, quote, "My hockey history as a hockey writer, going back to, quote, weak-kneed wimps," which he famously said after the Oilers lost to Los Angeles in 1982. And it was the only time my mom, who didn't follow hockey, got emotional about hockey. She said, "That's just too harsh." Okay, weak-kneed wimps. Okay, I'll start again. "My history as a hockey writer, going back to weak-kneed wimps, has not been to be a cheerleader or a fan, but I was pretty much all in for the Oilers' 5 Stanley Cup run and have stopped well short of predicting cups before or since then. Before or since. But I'm ready. This is the year. Bet on it. Bet on it. So Terry Jones, Fred Flintstone. So that's pretty, and I think Terry Jones' self-assessment there is correct. He can be really critical, and he's not a fan. He doesn't approach it as a fan. He approaches it as a, I don't know, heart surgeon or something like that.
He called him an iconoclast in my post.
Yeah, fair enough. He's all in on these Oilers this year. I mean, I can see why. I mean, this team is a really, really good hockey team. The other teams that they're competing with have not gotten better. Colorado is not much better, if they're better at all. And they've lost players for the last couple of years. Vegas is the same Vegas team. They've lost one or two guys. They've lost Riley Smith.
Replaced him with Ivan Barbashev. Yep.
Well, they had Barbashev already, but
well, they got him at the deadline with that Mark Stone convenient term injured reserve CTIR, where he was ready for the first game of the playoffs. But while he was out for basically just before the deadline until end of the regular season, they were able to go out and pick up on Barbashev, and he wound up on the first line. Of course, Stone played the whole playoffs. So, but then when the playoffs are over, they traded Riley Smith and they re-signed Barbashev to the identical money that they used to give to Riley Smith, $5.0 million. It's exactly what they gave Barbashev. And Kelly McCrimmon, boy, he's
well, if he was running the Oilers,
man, he's got a very different style than Ken
Would he have told Evander, Kane, and Cutter Yamamoto, you're sitting out the rest of the year? And at the trade deadline, pulled in more players that way? Possible. And maybe that would have been the difference maker. Well, anyway, I'm not.
Barbashev sure didn't hurt. But no, I got well.
We're not doing that, but I can.
Very different style.
It is a different style, and as Al Davis used to say, just win, baby.
Just win, baby. Yeah, he's a stone cold killer, McCrimmon, and he's pulled some questionable stuff, and yet the proof's in the pudding at this point. You can say, well, what he did to Marc-Andre Fleury or Max Pacioretty, giving them away for free, well, they might not have liked it, but that was how he got cap space to get the guys that he needed to put him over the top. And he just was quite cold-blooded about it, and I guess more power to him. It worked.
Yeah, don't they say the same thing about Bill Belichick, too? Cold-blooded and calculating? And,
yep.
And what has he got? 5 Super Bowl rings, I think, or 6? I don't even follow that closely.
Okay.
All right, so Jonesy's picking the Oilers. Now, Bruce, it should be said that heading into the playoffs, a number of betting sites and Money Puck, which is an analytics site, both had the Oilers as the favorites to win the Stanley Cup.
Sure.
So this is Terry Jones coming around, but some of the hardcore betting sites, I'm not exactly completely sure how they do it, whether they're setting the odds to get people to bet or whether they're setting the odds. They're obviously setting the odds to make as much money as they can.
Right.
That's the rule, and I don't quite know though what that means. Like how if they're trying to be fair and accurate, or what the dealio is. But anyway, the betting sites did have the Oilers as the top. Some of them as the top team heading into the playoffs, which I think is significant, and in some way. And so I thought the Oilers were going to win the Cup against Colorado. They were clearly not. They were clearly second best to Colorado. I had grossly underestimated the power of the Avs that year. I thought the Oilers were the best team heading into the playoffs last year, like a lot of experts did, and I'm still bitter about that. But they weren't the best team. Vegas was, as Darnell Nurse says. But this year, I mean, clearly they got to be one of the top 1 or 2, 3 Cup favorites. They just are. This is a fantastic hockey team. So.
Yeah, well, I want to see them start proving it right out of the gate, as they have done a few years lately. But what I really want to see is them keep proving it in November and December. None of this crazy-ass swan dives down the standings for the last 6 weeks of the calendar year. So they're entering the new year in 10th place in the West and, swimming uphill. Now you got to play Connor Leon, not only every night, but 23, 25 minutes, 28. And if it's a tight game, it goes to overtime, and no, do away with that stuff. Just start winning and keep winning. By the time you get to the end of December, you want to be 10 points up at least on the bottom playoff team and just keep winning. None of this crap. You're a good team.
Yeah.
Prove it all year.
What
I
a
don't
great
mean go
point,
crazy
Bruce.
like Boston. Just win and
Yeah.
get in first place and stay in first place. None of these late comebacks because you pissed away a whole bunch of points in November and December.
Well, you were making a good point there until you raised Boston, because Boston, of course, got off to the great start, was great all year, and then crashed out in the first round of the playoffs.
No.
But it was,
You don't have to be great. You just have to be real good, but be good consistently.
You know what? You don't want to be at game 25 or at game 30 and every game from then on being must win, which is what it felt like the last 2 seasons, right? It's just this crazy, like they're just
3 out of 4 seasons.
It's just painful. Like this really good team is just puts itself in this spot where they just got to go hard. Like get off to a great start and keep the pedal to the metal, and then kind of cruise a little bit. Maybe you can cruise then once you're in the playoffs.
15 points ahead at the deadline. You can experiment a bit. You can buy a player or two and experiment a bit. If you lose a game,
yeah.
You don't want to be losing that game on November 11th and then losing another one on November 12th, diving down anyway.
Okay, let's quickly go over the worst. I'm doing a post on the worst first overall draft picks in NHL history. And I got, just for some reason, Neil Yakupov's name popped in my mind this week. And I just looked up his statistics. And, I had never really thought of him in that category as the worst first overall pick in NHL history. But he is definitely in the running. Like there was always a hope that he would go to the KHL even and get his game together. But what's happened in the KHL is exactly what happened in the NHL. He's bombed out of the league essentially. I mean, he was hurt, I think, this year. As far as I can tell, he only played a handful of games, so it's kind of hard to tell. But he just had a really mediocre season in the KHL, which is kind of the equivalent. It's a bit better. It's better than the AHL, but not a whole heck of a lot better than the AHL. So that combined with a really mediocre NHL career. I mean, his NHL career puts him in the big three anyway, which is him, Greg Jolly, the 1974 first overall pick by the Washington Capitals, who never really got it going as an NHL player, although was a really, really good AHL player for about 4 or 5, 6 years. Greg Jolly played 365 NHL games. Then there's Patrick Stefan. I think he's the 2000 first overall pick, year 2000. He played more NHL games, 455. Yakupov's at 350. Patrick Stefan was a really mediocre NHL player, though. He had one good year in SM Liga in Finland. Didn't have much of an overseas career, and his hockey career was pretty short. So I actually think that Jolly's probably third on the list now. He had been first forever on that list, but I think it's down to Yakupov and Patrick Stefan as the worst first overall pick of all time. And Yakupov is making, as much as, man, I just remember seeing him at that first development camp in his first season with the Oilers. He looked like the real deal. I think Scotty Bowman had compared him either to Pavel Bure or Valery Harlamov or both. I mean, he looked like such a confident, lethal, sniping, goal-scoring hockey player. And for many years in Edmonton, there was a hardcore fan base who just loved this player. And we're expecting him, it was Yak City, and he was going to break out at any time. And he just wasn't. And then, there was the accusations he's not getting the breaks from the coach, like, why don't they play him with McDavid and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Yakupov. He'd be my vote, Bruce, as the worst first overall pick of all time at this point. Unless he does something to change that, I think he takes the cake.
Yeah, well, let's not forget. I mean, we talk about injury happening to these guys like Greg Jolly, and I want to say more on him in a sec, but Yakupov, the image that's frozen in my brain on my brain stem is of that clumsy linesman after off of a face-off, stumbling and losing his balance, grabbing onto Yakupov so it doesn't fall to the ice and hauling Yak down and tearing up his knee. Season-ending injury. ACL, I think, wasn't it?
What year
And
was
because
that? What year was that? His first. That wasn't
it's
his
the year
first
that
year,
he played
obviously.
40 games instead of 80. One of those. It wasn't his first year. He was in the hunt for the rookie prize
First year he
his
was in
first
the
year.
17 goals in
And
48 games. He had a good first
uh,
year, and it was all
uh-huh,
downhill after that.
yeah,
Dallas Aikens was blamed for a lot of it, as I recall.
uh-huh, yeah,
Maybe rightly so. And I know that the Oilers management, they never saw Yakupov as
hmm
Yakupov saw himself. The Oilers management saw
no,
Yakupov as kind of a mini power forward, like a,
hmm
Brendan Gallagher type. They wanted him to be this
hmm
kind of bowling ball in front of, like, go hard to the net, battle hard in the lanes, take the puck hard to the net, and you know what? Their vision of him probably was the one route to success as an NHL player that he had, because he in the end didn't have the superlative level of skill it took to be kind of a finesse player, and like his shooting was always a
he
little off.
lost his shot.
Passing was his pass. He passed too hard. He passed
He
too
was a
soft.
bullet passer. That's what part of the problem Nurse has. He passes too hard. And Yakupov was the same thing. These bullet passes, they'd be right on the tape and they'd bounce off of it because the guy wouldn't be able to handle the velocity. So yeah, I mean that injury did really set him back, but something happened to him, and it was similar in a way to what happened to Puljujärvi and Yamamoto this year. Other than Yak was a more natural goal scorer than either of those guys. And when he first showed up at his first dev camp, I remember watching him shooting the puck at that thing. You didn't need to have, you know, a real NHL goalie against him or defenseman or anything. It's just shooting drills. And the puck was just rocketing off his stick. And time again, he was just, bulging the twine, ringing the iron on the way in with the shot, whether it was goalie in the net or not. And first day I came away, I was going, what a shooter. And then something happened because by the end, it just seemed like he was whiffing and fanning. And I don't know. I wonder if these guys, if they got, little vision problems that they haven't quite identified or what it is. 'Cause I know it's obvious with the eye injury guys, they come back and their vision goes away and they start whiffing and bobbling pucks left and right. But it was kind of like that in sort of a micro scale, but you just lack that sort of perfect timing that you need to rocket those pucks, put them where you want to, and it just deserted him.
He had a really good year his first year in the
Mm-hmm.
KHL too. In 2018-19 with St. Petersburg, he scored 23 goals in 47 games. And then since then, his games just disintegrated at the KHL level. This year in the playoffs, he had 3 points in 14 games for Omsk Avangard. So, I just wonder if there is a universe
Mm-hmm.
where things had turned out differently. Like for Yak, like he one of the issues was his spot where he needed to be to succeed. He needed to be on the first power play unit on the right half wall where he could get off his
Yeah,
one-timer shot.
yeah.
And when he arrived there at the Oilers, they had two guys, Taylor Hall, the shooter, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, the passer, who that was also their
They were
best.
all lefties, yeah,
So there
except
was no
Everly.
spot. There was no spot for him on that top power play unit, really, because
Mm-hmm.
that was Taylor Hall's spot, essentially. And they didn't carve out a place for him there, and he just kind of he never got that confidence. Like if he had been there with the right passer, is there a different history of the universe where he might have become like a regular power play ace, firing in those pucks
Mm-hmm.
constantly? He seemed to have that ability. He did score the 17 goals in 48 games in his first season. So who knows? But what we've seen is he's never been able to consistently score at the professional level, except in two seasons, his first in Edmonton and his first in the KHL, and all other. It's essentially 10 seasons now. He's just been a mediocre goal scorer, and that's his best talent by far. He doesn't do much else. So
So
yeah, he might. I think Bruce, if I
mhm.
he might be my pick. Who would be your? Do you have
I,
a
I want to
thought?
mention Greg Jolly because he's from around these parts. Hockey Reference has him born in Calgary, but I have intelligence that places him in St. Paul, Alberta, great uh, French Canadian town in northeast of here. And the Jollies and the Desogniers, and there's a few families. And I used to work with Greg's cousin Jerry Jolly, who was himself a very good player, but he ripped up his knee in junior hockey, and so he never got to go. And I mean, I think it was knee too for Greg. But here's his problem: he goes to Washington Capitals first overall in the draft because Washington is the new expansion team, and the Washington Capitals come in. They got this 20-year-old kid that they're building their brand around, and in he comes from Regina to Washington D.C. to the worst team in the history of the NHL. The team that won 8 games, lost 67, tied five, with 181 goals for and 446 goals against. So in his first season, I'm just looking it up now, he played 44 games only because he got hurt, a young player, and he got banged up in his first year. 1 goal, 7 assists, 8 points, minus 69 in 44 games. And then by year two, he got up to 54 games and minus 47, so much better. But that was his 2 years in Washington, and by then he'd already been hurt, I think 2 or 3 different times, pretty significant injuries. And he had a couple of okay years in Detroit, and then he was done at 28. And I think physically he was done well before that.
You know, the interesting thing, this was also the Philadelphia Flyers, Broad Street Bullies era of the NHL, which was a brutal time in hockey, not
Yeah.
just because of that team. Most teams had two, three really rough and tough players, goons, and the Flyers had 6 or 7. And, you know, Washington, you know, he just, you know, it looks like he took a beating with injury just from his games played. Now, he did have some good years in the AHL.
Mm-hmm.
He was a strong AHL defenseman, obviously, but he just he seemed to get a lot of injuries at the NHL level, and he just never made it. And as you say, I think that's a mitigating factor. Of course, the Oilers
Mm-hmm.
with Yakupov were a pretty desperate team as well. Like that was a horrible hockey team,
Mm-hmm.
but with more talent than those Washington Capitals had. And you know, the Oilers were arguably the worst team of their era,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't the worst team in NHL history.
Oh, nothing
No.
close. And that, as bad as they weren't minus 265 goals on the season like the 19, legendary 1974-75 Washington Capitals. They were the Cleveland Spiders of hockey. Uh,
Bruce,
the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. There's a mandatory 19th century sports reference.
let's go to your post on whatever became of. You looked at a number of Oilers defensemen who were still in the NHL but have been moved out by the Edmonton Oilers and how they're doing. And this was a really pertinent question because so many of these players, right to the day they were traded, had hardcore believers among the Oilers
Mm-hmm.
fan base. So the Oilers were making a massive, hideous, ugly, franchise-rending mistake by moving out, Matt Benning or Caleb Jones or Ethan Bear, or those are the ones that come most to mind in terms of that kind of criticism.
Or
But
Michael
there's a long
Kesselring,
list.
eh?
Michael Kesselring. Well, we were Kesselring fans, but we were not happy necessarily he was traded. But we both, I think, supported the trade at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah,
So
me too.
the one trade I hated was, Jeff Petry's on your list. That's the one I hated. I
Mm-hmm.
hated that. The one I didn't like Justin Schultz being moved, but I completely understood it because his confidence was crushed in Edmonton. He had to move. He had to go because he was not going to make it here. What did you find overall?
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, the Oilers have seeded the NHL with a lot of players. I found a list of 17 guys numbered among the 334 NHL defenders. So a little over 5%, a 1 in 20 in a 32-team league. that were either drafted by the Oilers or signed by the Oilers, and or signed by the Oilers. And they did have a couple that got away without ever playing here, and all the others played their first NHL game here. Like I wasn't interested in particularly what happened with a guy like Adam Larson or Tyson Berry that came partway through their career and then went on their business somewhere. I was just interested in the young guys who started here. Where'd all these guys go? And a lot of them are still around. And there's a few more that are still just right there on the bubble, like Marty Marinson and Brandon Davidson that just left the league here in the last 1 or 2 years. And a couple that are still hanging around by miracle. Taylor Fadoon is still playing in the National Hockey League. 4 games this year. He's up to 131 now, 6 different teams over 8 different seasons. Out of the last 11 seasons, Fadoon has played 8 of them since they signed him, 8 seasons where he's had games in the NHL. And for what he overcame as an undrafted player who then broke his femur in his first professional camp to come out and still have the drive, he's a Edmonton boy, Fadoon, and he's a rocket scientist, I think was what the degree was he took at the Ivy League school he went to. He's one smart cookie. I interviewed him one time. I think maybe. And anyway, he got the burning fire for hockey, and he's still got it. And he's got to be 30, 31, 32 now.
If he hadn't had that horrible injury where he was driven into the boards in a really ugly hit, I just wonder, he was going to make the Oilers that year.
It looked like he was going to make the team right out of camp. It was a big, pleasant surprise.
He looked good. He looked really good for the Oilers. He went to Princeton University. That was a really brutal injury. I can't remember who hit him, but that was just a brutal play.
So I organized this list, and I included the guys the Oilers drafted that are still on the Oilers. There's 5 of those. There's 12 guys that wound up not here, and 5 that still are here. Darnell Nurse, Evan Bouchard, Philip Broberg, Marcus Niemelainen, and Vincent DeHarnay that have only ever played in the NHL for the Oilers. So I split them out first in the order that they got picked. And of course, most of the early guys like Petrie and Fadoon and Eric Gustafson, who they never signed, which was a mistake, that have gone and continue to play in the NHL. And then later on, I sorted them by just 2022-23 performance, and I just sorted them by ice time. And out of the list, I found just 3 guys that play 20 minutes a night on this list, led unsurprisingly by Darnell Nurse at 23.5 minutes, but Jeff Petrie still at 22, and John Marino, the other one that got away, 21 minutes and 4 seconds last year playing for, he got traded.
New Jersey.
New Jersey, yeah, that's right. And he was like a big +2 there.
He didn't really get away. He was 21. He was
never going to come here. That was... Once Peter Chiarelli left, Oilers' chances of signing Marino went down the drain, and so he just played the Justin Schultz card. I mean, the Oilers got a couple guys like that too, right? Matt Benning, Justin Schultz, that were drafted and didn't sign with their drafting teams, and this is what Marino was going to do. So Ken Holland, in recognizing this, just said, "Well, I'll trade him. I'll trade his rights and get something back," and he got a 6th-round pick back. But it didn't seem very fair, and Marino just graduated immediately to the NHL and became a top 4 defenseman with Pittsburgh, and then now with New Jersey, pretty good clubs, and right shot defenseman, and he was always in the bushes, David. Even the years that we were tracking him as a prospect, remember Harvard University. And he was the number 2 right shot defenseman because the number 1 guy was a dude named Adam Fox, who's since gone on to win the Norris Trophy, right? So Fox got all the power play minutes, all the points. And here you had Marino, sort of the playing on the defensive half of the side of the spectrum and not putting up that many points. And turned out he was a pretty good player the whole time. And so that was one that got away. But the ones that got away, Gustafson and Marino, they never signed them. And you could say, well, it was a mistake or, whatever circumstances. That went on to be good players elsewhere. And most of the guys who actually started and played here for a while are kind of in the pack, right? We've got Matt Benning. He was 19 minutes a night this year in San Jose on a poor team. Caleb Jones, 19 minutes a night in Chicago, a poor team. Ethan Bear, 18 minutes on mostly Vancouver. Evan Bouchard now with the Oilers, 18 minutes, 1 second less than Ethan Bear. So for all those people saying Bouchard needs to get paid the big bucks, his ice time is a little shy compared to some of the other guys that just got paid up. I'll just leave that there because I think we discussed it before. Dustin Schultz still playing 18 minutes a night, but in Weird Seattle, that's a second pairing. And then after that, it's a bunch of, Michael Kesselring, Jordan Osterley, who's just kind of in a decent third pairing defenseman for generally not great teams.
Yeah, Brad Hunt.
And then Brad Hunt is in there. And of course, Taylor Fadoon with his 4 games. And Brad Hunt, though, he played 47 games this year, and he's still in the league. So a lot of these guys that Edmonton identified and brought in, even the ones they signed, Hunt, Fadoon, Osterley, Schultz, Benning, they didn't draft any of those guys. They picked them all off on the open market as unsigned, entry-level free agents, I call them. And then the rest that they picked in the draft, and of the ones they picked in the draft, invariably it's the first rounders that rise to the top. I mean, Darnell Nurse, out of this whole list this year, he led the list of 17 NHL defensemen in games played, average time on ice, goals, points, and plus. And I'm pretty sure penalty minutes as well, but I didn't include it. And, but also you have Evan Bouchard, Philip Broberg, that are in the process of coming up. At least we hope so with Broberg, and we're getting pretty clear signs with Bouchard that he's blossoming, into a very good player. And then a whole lot of sort of third pairing guys, 5, 6, 7 guys, tweeners. There's not a lot of places you can point, boy, did they ever mess up and let this guy go on to become a star for some other NHL team for 15 years. And
yeah, Marincin's not on your list, but he's the first one that I really recall where there was this huge faction of people that were holding out. I liked him too. I liked all of these players at some point. I mean, they all have aspects to the game which are admirable. But at some point, it also became clear that they probably weren't going to be top 4 defensemen. And the kind of the angst and rancor when they were traded was a little bit over the top, starting with Marincin, continuing on to Benning and Jones and Bear. And so it's, there was, I think at some point, the Oilers had come to a certain end with these players. They didn't think in Edmonton they would be top 4 D-men, so it was probably time to move them and try somebody else who might. And I think those were the correct decisions. And we're getting to where we'll soon be at that point with Philip Broberg. Where we're gonna in the next year or two, we'll see if he's gonna pan out or not. And right now, I like this player a lot, and I think he's going to be a very good NHL player. I think he could easily be a top 4 D-man, defensive D-man, shutdown defenseman. But we'll see, and we'll see if there's probably a similar controversy around him as there's been around the other ones. But I thought it's an interesting list, and it brought back all of those old controversies. My final thought on it is I was so glad. I think Justin Schultz was poorly treated by the fans of Edmonton. And I think that he's the one player when he went to Pittsburgh and won those 2 Stanley Cups, I was thrilled with that because that guy could always play. He could always move the puck exceptionally well. He was a strong power player, and he showed that with the Pittsburgh Penguins on 2 Stanley Cup winning teams, where he was playing a key role. So good for him.
A fairly recent retiree who would be on the same list would be Matt Green, who made the Stanley Cup Finals with Edmonton and then went on to win 2 Stanley Cups with Los Angeles. Generally as a third pairing D-man. He never really rose above third pairing, but he was a hell of a good third pairing D-man, and he was while he was here.
He was like that Don Jackson kind of third pairing D-man, like a defensive defenseman who can fight and hit. And
Clear
Very
the
valuable
crease
player.
and clear the
Yeah.
rebound and
Deharnay,
clean up
right?
the opponent. Yeah.
He's a version of the
hmm
Deharnay
That
defenseman.
type for sure.
All right, Bruce. Did we cover all the territory that we set out to tonight? Have we? I think that might be it. So we're just waiting for the McLeod and Bouchard decisions this week. When those happen, we'll probably do a podcast then, and we'll talk about that. And it sounds like there's talk of the Oilers signing one more center iceman for the fourth line. We'll see if that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, it's pretty quiet. We're moving on. We've now voted on the prospect series. All five of us. We had myself, you, Kurt Levins, Ira Cooper, and Jim Matheson, Hockey Hall of Fame writer, has participated. I think it's Jim's fourth year in a row voting in the prospect series. So we've all voted and we have our list. This isn't exactly a spoiler, but it's a pretty shallow prospect pool, Bruce, that the Oilers have right now. It's the most shallow prospect pool they've had in
years. Well, I don't know.
15 years, 20
Yeah,
years.
I was going to say all the time we've been doing that, but then there was all those years where the first rounder would be number one year, and then he'd already be graduated the next year, so it would be a new 18-year-old kid at the top of the list.
Yeah.
But what happened this year is we essentially lost 4 number ones from this list because we had graduating Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, and then of course Reed Schaefer got traded, and the first round pick from this year got traded in that same trade. And surely that guy would have been numbered in the top 3. Yeah. Whoever they would have drafted in the first round this year, they hung on to that pick. So that's essentially a vacuum of 2019, 20, 22, and 23. And so the guy from 2021, Xavier Bourgault, he kind of stands out as the only first rounder that's currently in the system. So it is a bit shy, and the list is way small. There's only 27 guys on it. We've
Usually
always had in
35
the 30s,
to 40.
30, yeah. We had 35 was pretty standard. But again, they've not only have they graduated guys, but they've traded so many draft picks that they're just not replenishing. The minors, and they're replenishing more and more of the minors with AHL contracts, who by definition we leave off of our considerations for, because trying to project an AHL. Every once in a while you get one, right? But Vinny Deharnay, between being a draft choice and being ranked for a few years, but when he signed the AHL contract, we stopped ranking him, and then when he played his way back into contention, we ranked him again last year.
It's quite a story. He might be the only one of the few players who was in the 30s, like in our rankings in the 30s.
4 years in a row.
Who's ever made it to the? Well, he was unranked a couple of years because he was like an AHL contract.
Well, that's right.
So so it's quite an amazing thing. So Bruce, we'll be writing about that probably starting sometime next week. So, all right. Well, we'll leave it there. Bruce, thank you for talking today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between time, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.